ॐ अज्ञानतिमिरन्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरुवे नमः। नमो ॐ विष्णुपदाय कृष्णप्रेष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्तस्वामिनिति नामिने। नमस्ते सरस्वती देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्यदेशतारिणे। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासदि गौरभक्तवृंद। हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे। So after describing various stages of yoga, Lord Kapila is describing the highest perfection of yoga. In these few verses we find Lord Kapila describing the perfection of yoga, what one is going to achieve as ultimate result of this yoga practice. So that is the word charamaya. Charamaya means ultimate. So very beautifully Prabhupada explains what all one is going to achieve when one is in the perfectional stage of yoga. Thus situated in the highest transcendental stage. So what all happens? Number one, mind ceases from all material reactions and becomes situated in its own glory. So we understand there are two kinds of covering for the spirit soul. One is this gross body, another is the subtle body. Gross body is formed based on subtle body. It is the conception which we carry with our subtle body that gives us a gross body in the next life. That is why the most important goal of yoga practice is to purify the mind, to control the mind. So, at the highest transcendental stage, what happens is the mind regains its original quality. The spirit soul has everything. The original mind of the spirit soul gets covered by the material mind. The original body of the spirit soul gets covered by this gross body. So what is required at the present moment is to purify our subtle body, specifically the mind. If the mind is purified, then it regains its original quality. Just like you're wearing a glass. The glass gets covered by some dust. Then you are not able to see properly. You see very vaguely, and as it is you are not able to see. So 3 kinds of covering are there. Bhagavad Gita says, gross ignorance, when that is covering, it is something like the child covered by the embryo of the mother. Very gross covering. So he practically cannot see anything. Then, just like fire is there and smoke is there, that is another kind of covering. Or mirror is there and dust on the mirror is there, that is another kind of covering. So when these different kinds of coverings are removed completely and one is no more affected by these 3 modes of material nature, then his mind is completely purified. When the mind is completely purified, the living entity regains his original position, its original glory. So that is what Lord Kapila is saying. The mind ceases from all material reactions and becomes situated in its own glory. So this is one thing which happens. What will be the result? How do we know mind has ceased from material reactions? So Prabhupada is saying, Lord Kapila is saying, it will become transcendental to all material conceptions of happiness and distress. Now, at present stage, everybody is undergoing happiness and distress. In happiness, we are thinking, we are enjoying. In distress, we are thinking, we are suffering. How will it become transcendental to material happiness and distress? Lord Kapila is explaining that further. So first, Lord Kapila is saying, mind will cease from all material reactions in the transcendental stage. It will become situated in its own original glory. And how do we understand that? It has become situated in its original glory. No more it will be affected by happiness and distress of this material world. How that happens? Further he describes. At that time, the yogi realizes the truth of his relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He understands, falsely I was identifying with matter. Falsely I was identifying myself with this body. Happiness and distress coming to the body is not my happiness and distress. It is not mine. I was falsely identifying myself with this material body. And what does he realize? The truth of his relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He understands his real relationship with the Supreme Lord. Anybody remembers that Bhaktivinoda Thakur's verse where he says, if the living entity understands I am eternal servant of Krishna, no more distress. Recently we sang that. Jeev Krishna Das Ei Vishwas Korale To Aur Dukha Nai. If the living entity comes back to its original glory, understanding I am part and parcel of Krishna, no more happiness and distress. So if happiness and distress we are still facing, we are lacking in that realization. We are still thinking, I am this material body. Isn't it? So, then what else he will realize? Very beautifully Lord Kapila is describing. So one is, he will realize he is part and parcel of Krishna. His relationship, loving relationship with the Supreme Lord, he will realize. And that time he discovers something very important. Prabhupada is translating like that. He discovers that pleasure and pain, as well as their interaction, which he attributed to his own self. He was attributing, I am enjoying pleasure. I am suffering now. So much suffering. Krishna, better I commit suicide. Isn't it? I am enjoying life now. So nice. Isn't it? So he discovers that this pain and pleasure, as well as their interaction, which he attributed to his own self, are actually due to false ego. In the final conception, final perfection, he will realize, so much pain, pleasure I was thinking, all these things are actually nothing but because of false ego. Very nicely, in one of the lectures I was hearing, it is described how false ego actually makes us to think we are enjoying and we are suffering. So, you'll find that Prabhupada is explaining that in the second paragraph very nicely. As long as one acts on his own account, he is subject to all material perception of so-called happiness and distress. Actually, there is no happiness, just as there is no happiness in any of the activities of a madman. So in material activities, the mental concoction of happiness and distress are false. Actually, everything is distress. It's just like madman. I sometimes related this many times in my classes. In Bangalore, in Majestic area, I do not know whether they still have that. There used to be a sugarcane juice shop, very famous, and a lot of people would line up, and sometimes, when we used to go for book distribution, so we also used to purchase that sugarcane juice, and in the afternoon, because morning we used to go and afternoon practically nothing. So some fruits or some sugarcane juice like that we would take. So this we would have seen sometimes, that sugarcane, that person who is taking out the sugarcane juice, how he takes it out? Practically folding it many times, and practically no juice left. And after that, he bundles it and just throws it one side. Later on, he uses it for some other purpose, for burning or whatever. So sometimes you will find some mad person, some very hairs, untidy hairs, doesn't take bath, some torn cloth, you will find him. So he will come, he may pick it up and he'll try to, drink juice out of it. No sane man actually will try to take juice out of that sugarcane, that plant, in which actually there is practically no juice. Only a madman will do. Similarly, this false ego makes us matta pramatta. It is a madness because of false ego. When a person starts thinking, I am enjoying. And then similarly when he suffers, he is thinking, I am suffering. Chanchalapati Prabhu was giving one example that he had seen. He was observing once in the traffic light. So generally we all see the traffic light is, it is computerized and it is, what do you call that? Not automated, in computer language, what do you call it? Programmed. Yes. It is programmed in a certain way. After this many minutes, red light will come. And after this many minutes, green light will come, orange light will come, right? So it is all programmed already. So he was saying that he saw while walking on the traffic that one madman, he is seeing the light. So when red light comes, he is telling the traffic, stop, stop, stop. And the traffic is stopping. And the moment green light comes, he is saying, go, go, go. And they are going, and people are also smiling and laughing at him. So this madman, he is actually thinking, when he is showing his hand like this, traffic is stopping. And when he is telling like this, traffic is going. Actually, it is not so. It is not that seeing him, the traffic is stopping, and when he is telling like that, traffic is going. But in his madness, he is not able to understand that everything is happening, some programming is being done, and that is how people are stopping and people are going. Isn't it? So you can just imagine, this is the madness created by false ego. In the false ego platform, he starts enjoying independent of the Supreme Lord. Actually, that is not his position at all. It's a mad position. His constitutional position is to be servant. But false ego gives him a feeling that actually he is the controller, he is the enjoyer, he is the proprietor. So similarly, he thinks when something happens to him, he is thinking he is suffering. So very simple, the moment person comes to the perfectional stage and this ignorance is gone. Ignorance is the cause of false ego. And how ignorance comes? Ignorance comes because of the illusory energy of the Lord, which covers our real knowledge. Why the illusory energy of the Lord covers our real knowledge? Because we desire. When the living entity develops a desire because of enviousness of the Supreme Lord, then immediately Maya covers his knowledge. False ego is given to him and he misidentifies himself with whatever material body. Imagine the power of false ego. When the living entity is in human life, he is able to see the distress of lower species of life. But when the same living entity is transferred to the life of a hog, lower species of life, he is enjoying that life. No sane man actually will think eating stool and sleeping in some gutter, dirty place, that is enjoyment. But he is enjoying. Small worm in the stool, even that is enjoying. Even a small ant, you are thinking you just try to put one block, it will go here and there. Isn't it? This is the power of false ego. So the whole yoga system is actually meant to purify this consciousness. And the most important instrument is the mind. Because mind is the one which desires. Intelligence can discriminate which desire is good, which is not good. But mind is the one which desires. Of course, originally it is the living entity. In the conditioned life, it is mind. So when consciousness will become purified, when the mind will become completely purified, then the living entity regains its original glory as the servant of the Supreme Lord. So you see how Prabhupada is very nicely describing this whole phenomenon, starting with forgetfulness of our sweet relationship with the Supreme Lord. This dukkha we are suffering in this material world, in the name of sukha also. Actually everything is dukkha. That is how Krishna has designated this whole material world, dukkhalyam. Isn't it? Just like if you are thinking you are going to get nectar in Madiralyam, it is not there. Madirala means it is drunkard's place. Dukkhalya means it's a place of misery. So where is the question of getting happiness here? Isn't it? So very nicely Prabhupada describes the reason of our suffering in this material world. Forgetfulness of one's relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead is a product of ignorance. In ignorance we think, I will enjoy, right? Ichha dvesha samudhena sarge yanti parantapa. Krishna says that it is because of living entities' desire to lord it over, being envious of the Supreme Lord. Sarge, all creations take place in this material world. So the Lord facilitates this creation to satisfy the desire to be independent of the Supreme Lord, which is born out of ignorance. Ignorance of our real, original position. So, by yoga practice, one can eradicate this ignorance of thinking oneself independent of the Supreme Lord. One's actual relationship is eternally that of love. So, our relationship with the Supreme Lord is actually out of love. In the material world, the relationship is not because of love. It is all because of lording it over tendency. Nobody wants to be servant, everybody wants to be the enjoyer. That is called lording over tendency. That is why in the material world, nobody wants to serve. Because it is thought that the master actually enjoys and he exploits service out of servant. That is how it is. Today, somebody is serving in some company, but if some other company gives him a better offer, he will leave this company and he will go to another company. Because it is that relationship of service is not because of love. It is not that out of love he is serving. Some very remote example, material example of reflection of that pure love which exists in the spiritual world is parents not expecting from their children. That is something, tinge of that spiritual love, what exists in the spiritual world, where parents want to take care of their children. Not, of course, nowadays we find it very clearly. They will say, my son has joined, but I was expecting he will take care of me in the old age. Isn't it? So practically even that is not there. But otherwise, generally we find that parents, when they take care of the children, it is out of love. It is not out of that, tomorrow I am going to gain something out of him. So that in complete pure sense exists in the spiritual world. That loving relationship. So devotee, when he is serving the Supreme Lord, it is completely out of love. It is not out of some kind of force. When there is force, there is no love. That has to be understood very clearly. Isn't it? When there is force, there is no love. Love is voluntarily, out of one's own freedom. That is called love. So, the living entity is meant to render transcendental loving service to the Lord. See, everywhere you will find, that is how Prabhupada translates bhakti is loving service. It is not some burden service. It's not some burden service. Like in this material world also you will find people are working hard day and night. Why? Something is driving them. Some kind of affection for their family is driving them. That is how they are working hard. Otherwise, why people will work hard like this? Isn't it? Forgetfulness of that sweet relationship is called ignorance. And in ignorance, one is impelled by material modes of nature to think himself the enjoyer. Different degrees. When he is under the modes of goodness, some conception is there about that this material world is temporary. He comes to understand. But he also feels a sense of enjoyment, being enlightened to certain extent. So even there also he is thinking, I am the enjoyer. Similarly in passion, when he works hard, and in ignorance, without taking any responsibility, drunken stage, even in that he is enjoying. He is thinking, I am the enjoyer. When the devotee's mind is purified and he understands that his mind has to be dovetailed with the desire of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he has attained the perfectional transcendental stage which is beyond the perception of material distress and happiness. So what is required now through yoga system, what is done is the mind is purified and it is dovetailed with the desire of the Supreme Lord. That is the change actually which is required by practicing yoga. Same thing happened to Arjuna. Arjuna, before hearing Bhagavad Gita, his desires were not dovetailed with the desires of Krishna. He had independent desires. He was thinking independent of the Supreme Lord. Krishna's desire was he should fight. But Arjuna was thinking otherwise. Krishna spoke the whole Bhagavad Gita and finally asked Arjuna, what is his decision now? And Arjuna's decision was, Karishye vachanam tava, my dear Krishna, whatever you say, whatever you desire, I will do that. This is called perfection of yoga. So through all the yogas, whether it is karma yoga, jnana yoga, dhyana yoga, bhakti yoga, one has to come to this perfectional stage, understanding our loving relationship with the Supreme Lord as his part and parcel, as his servant, and dovetailing. Even in our conditioned life, we have to try to dovetail at least. I may like, I may not like. Later on, it will be natural. Later on, it will be completely natural. Just to do what Krishna desires. It is just like our healthy position is, when I want to lift my hand, I desire, immediately hand lifts. Will the hand say, no, I will not? I am feeling hungry. Automatically hand will go to the food. It will take the food, it will take to the mouth. Right? This is a healthy condition. Unhealthy condition, I desire, whatever reason, hand is not in a position to lift and take the food. It is an unhealthy condition. So some surgery will be required, something is required to be done. Either mind is paralyzed, you are thinking, but there is paralysis and you are not able to lift, even if you desire. So it's a diseased condition. So, in our loving relationship, naturally we will dovetail. No question of dovetailing. Dovetailing happens when you desire something and still somehow or other you dovetail. Otherwise, it is as Krishna desires. The devotees understand the desires of the Supreme Lord. In immature stage, one may not understand the desires of the Supreme Lord. When he is completely self-realized, then he understands the desire of the Supreme Lord. This is the real oneness. Oneness does not mean he becomes one with Supreme. He becomes one with Supreme in desire. That yes, whatever the Supreme Lord desire, that is what I should do. That is the meaning. So, this is what Prabhupada is saying. And then Prabhupada is saying, as long as one acts on his own account, he is subject to material perception of happiness and distress. When he understands Krishna is desiring me to do like this, and he acts, and happiness and distress come, he does not identify. He does not, because happiness and distress is not his. Somebody else has told him to do. Happiness and distress also belongs to the Supreme Lord. It is not mine. In the beginning, when Arjuna was trying to kill, he was suffering. I am going to kill my own grandfather Bhishma. I have to kill Dronacharya. Later on he killed. And he was not happy or suffering. Isn't it? Because he understood. It is the desire of the Supreme Lord. So many people were killed. Of course, Vaishnava is always compassionate. Even after killing Maharaj Yudhishthira, we find he was very distressed that just to install me on the throne, so much of massacre has happened, and he was in distress. And nobody could, even Lord Krishna could not mitigate his distress. Of course, there was a reason for that. Krishna wanted to glorify Bhishma, and then all the Pandavas go to Bhishma, and then they hear from Bhishma. And then Bhishma is telling, Maharaj Yudhishthira, don't you understand? It is very difficult to understand what the Supreme Lord desires. You are Dharma personified. Supreme Lord is the father of religion. Isn't it? You are all doing only pious activities. Isn't it? So much material strength, spiritual direction. Supreme Lord is personally present. In spite of that, if you see there are so many suffering, then you should understand it is the will of the Supreme Lord. You cannot understand. You see. And then once again, after hearing this, Maharaj Yudhishthira was completely removed of that ignorance. He understood, yes. Isn't it? Just like Prabhupada gives the example. Just one final example we'll take. Krishna in Bhagavad Gita, when Arjuna is crying, it is said, Prasanniva, Krishna is smiling. Arjuna is crying, saying, my Gandiva is falling from my hand, tears are coming out, my body is shaking. And Prabhupada is saying it is out of so much of grief. There are two kinds of shivering of the body. One is out of fear of life, and another is out of happiness. So this is not out of happiness. It is completely out of fear. That so many people I have to kill, my own kinsmen, that attachment. You see? And Krishna is smiling. Isn't it? Because Krishna's looking, perception, and Arjuna's perception is different. And Arjuna, Krishna wants to bring him to his perception. You see from spiritual vision. Come to spiritual vision. Then this happiness and distress will not be there. You will also smile like me. So Prabhupada gives an example that a child, his toy, it is broken. Child like anything. So should the father also cry along with the child? Father will be smiling. Hey beta, what is there? I will get you one more toy. Isn't it? Not that father will also start crying with the child. Because father's perception about child and the toy he is playing with is completely different. For the child, he is in ignorance. He is thinking, this is my life. This is all in all. Isn't it? So, when one comes to this perfectional stage, then he will understand that actually the sukha, dukkha, all this is because of ignorance, because of false ego. I am identifying, sometimes I am happy, sometimes I am in distress. And when he comes to that spiritual platform, he understands, what is this? This body is given by material nature. Something is happening to this material body, I am identifying with it and I am suffering. It's exactly like you sit in cinema hall, watch one movie, horror movie, you are terrified. Actually nothing is happening to you and nothing is happening in real. But because you identify, you feel distressed. Sometimes after film people are crying. Isn't it? Nothing has happened to them actually, but because they identify. This false ego makes us to identify with matter and things associated with matter, and we suffer and enjoy. So we'll stop with this. Granthara Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Jagat Guru Srila Prabhupada.